My parents spoke to me, or even better, showed me what it meant to have both privilege and responsibility.
What do you do when you're 13 years old and you want to honor a grandmother you never met? Most kids might look at old photos, maybe ask their parents to tell stories. But when you're Prince George, the future King of England, and that grandmother is Princess Diana, the most famous woman of the 20th century, you do something that breaks 30 years of royal silence. No cameras, no press release, no permission from the palace. Just a quiet walk into a garden at dusk, carrying something so small it fit in the palm of his hand. Something with a history older than his parents, older than their marriage, older than the tragedy that took his grandmother's life. And when King Charles found out what his grandson had done, it didn't just move him, it broke him. This is the story of a wedding anniversary that was never supposed to be remembered, a gesture that was never supposed to happen, and a moment that changed everything. The anniversary, no one mentions. July 29, 1981, St. Paul's Cathedral, 750 million people watching worldwide, a 20-year-old bride in a gown with a 25-foot train, a fairy tale wedding that the world still remembers 45 years later. But here's what most people don't know. The royal family hasn't acknowledged that date in nearly 30 years. Not with a statement, not with a photograph, not with a single line in the court circular, the official daily record of royal activities. Because when a royal marriage ends in divorce, the anniversary gets erased. It's treated like it never happened. The palace doesn't mark it, the family doesn't mention it, it just disappears into silence. And Charles and Diana's marriage, it ended badly, really badly. They divorced in 1996 after 15 years of a relationship that had become a public spectacle of betrayal, heartbreak, and tabloid warfare. A year later, Diana was dead. So for the last 3 decades, July 29th has P, is said quietly. No tributes, no memorials, no acknowledgement that on that day in 1981, the future King of England married the woman who would become the most photographed person on the planet. Until this year. This year, something changed. And it started with a 13-year-old boy asking his father a simple question. The photograph that started everything. Prince George is Diana's eldest grandchild. He was born almost 16 years after she died, which means he never got to meet her, never heard her laugh, never felt her hug him the way she hugged William and Harry when they were young. But a few weeks ago, George came across a photograph of his grandmother on her wedding day, and he noticed something in her hands. It wasn't the bouquet. Well, it was, but it was something specific inside the bouquet that caught his attention. So he asked his father, "What is she holding?" Now Prince William could have given a simple answer. He could have said, "Oh, that's just flowers, George. All brides carry flowers." But he didn't. Instead, he told his son about a royal tradition that's been quietly carried on since 1858, a tradition most people have never even heard of. It's called the myrtle tradition. Here's how it works. Every royal bride since Queen Victoria's eldest daughter has carried a sprig of myrtle in her wedding bouquet. Not just any myrtle, myrtle from a specific bush growing at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. The same bush, for over 160 years. When Princess Victoria got married in 1858, she used a cutting from that original plant. And ever since, every royal bride, including Diana in 1981 and Catherine in 2011, has carried myrtle descended from that exact same bush. After each wedding, a cutting from the bride's sprig is sent back to Osborne House and replanted, so the tradition continues. It's one of the oldest unbroken wedding rituals in the British monarch. It's older than tiaras, older than the dress codes, older than most of the pomp and ceremony we associate with royal weddings today. And Diana's wedding bouquet in 1981 included that very same myrtle. When William explained this to his son, he probably thought that would be the end of it. A nice piece of family history, a moment between father and son. But George didn't let it go. He wanted to do something with that information, something meaningful, something personal. And what he decided to do next would quietly shatter 3 decades of official royal silence. The request that broke protocol. Here's where the story gets really interesting. George didn't just want to know about the myrtle tradition. He wanted to honor it, in his own way. So, according to sources close to the household, he asked if he could have a sprig of myrtle himself. Not for a wedding, for something else entirely. He wanted to bring it to his grandmother's memorial statue in the sunken garden at Kensington Palace. Now this is where things get complicated. The sunken garden has no ceremonial connection to the myrtle tradition. None. It was redesigned before Diana's statue was unveiled in 2021 to reflect the colors of her wardrobe, whites, blues, and soft pastels. but it has nothing to do with weddings or wedding flowers. There's no precedent for what George was asking, no written rule, no protocol, and yet somehow the request was granted. A cutting was taken from a myrtle plant growing inside Kensington Palace's own walled garden. Stock descended from the original Osborne House bush, normally reserved for royal weddings only. Nobody at the press office approved it, nobody scheduled it, nobody briefed the photographers or issued a statement. This was William acting entirely on his own, arranging something for his son without telling anyone whose job it is to manage the family's image. It was the first crack in 30 years of official silence about his parents' marriage, and it was done quietly, privately, and completely under the radar. The visit that changed everything. On the evening of July 28th, the night before what would have been his grandparents' 45th wedding anniversary, Prince George walked into the sunken garden. He had one protection officer with him. No press, no photographers, no palace officials, just a 13-year-old boy carrying a single sprig of myrtle in his hand. He knelt at the base of his grandmother's statue, not at the plinth where people normally leave flowers for photo ops, but down low at the statue's feet, where you'd have to know exactly where to look to even notice it. He pressed the myrtle into the soil. He stayed there for less than a minute. Then he stood up, said nothing that anyone recorded, and left the way he came. No fanfare, no statement, no Instagram post, just a grandson honoring a grandmother he never met, using a tradition that connected her wedding day to his present moment. And if that was all that happened, it would already be a beautiful, private gesture. But that's not where the story ends. The moment King Charles found out. The next morning, July 29th, the actual anniversary, King Charles was told what his grandson had done. He was in the middle of preparing for his official engagements when the detail reached him. And according to sources who spoke to the Daily Mail, he didn't say much at first. He asked one question: where exactly did he leave it? And then he went silent. For the rest of the day, Charles said nothing more about it. But what he did spoke louder than any statement ever could. He cleared an appointment that had been on his schedule for weeks, and he went to the sunken garden himself, alone, except for a single protection officer. No Camilla, no press secretary, no photographer. King Charles has never been photographed at Diana's memorial statue since it was unveiled in 2021. Not on her birthday, not on any anniversary, not once in 5 years. But on the morning of what would have been their 45th wedding anniversary, he went. Staff who were tending the garden that morning later described seeing him standing still for far longer than the visit required. His hands were in his coat pockets. He wasn't looking up at the statue. He was looking down at a small patch of soil at the statue's feet, the same spot where his grandson had knelt the night before, and he stood there, in silence, for a long time. What this really means: here's what makes this story so powerful. It wasn't planned. There was no coordination, no palace strategy, no carefully managed PR campaign. George's request started with a photograph and a question. William's response started with a father wanting to answer his son honestly. And Charles's visit came a full day later once he already knew what had happened. Not to arrange it, not to control it, but simply to be part of it. 3 people, 3 generations, each arriving separately at the same instinct, none of them waiting for permission, none of them asking the other 2 to go first. This is what makes it so different from every other royal gesture we've seen in recent years. It wasn't about optics. It wasn't about headlines. It wasn't about proving anything to the public. It was about something much simpler and much harder: memory. For 30 years, the royal family let July 29th go dark. They didn't talk about it. They didn't mark it. They acted like it never happened. But a 13-year-old boy decided that wasn't right. He decided his grandmother's wedding day, no matter how it ended, was worth remembering. And by doing so, he quietly restored a date the family had erased. The tradition Diana never thought about. Tea again. Here's the detail that stays with me. When Diana carried that sprig of myrtle in her wedding bouquet on July 29, 1981, she was 20 years old. She probably didn't think twice about it. It was just part of the ceremony, part of the tradition, something royal brides do. She had no idea that 45 years later, her grandson, whom she would never meet, would choose that same flower from that same lineage to honor her memory in a garden built in her name. She had no idea that the tradition she participated in without a second thought would one day become the bridge connecting her wedding day to her legacy. And she had no idea that it would be a child, her own blood, who would decide that her story deserved to be told differently than the palace wanted. Not with silence, not with erasure, but with something small, meaningful, and deeply personal. what this tells us about the next reign. If you want to understand what kind of king Prince George might become one day, this story gives you a pretty clear answer. He's 13 years old. He had no obligation to mark his grandparents' wedding anniversary. Nobody expected him to. Nobody would have blamed him if he'd never even thought about it. But he did. He asked questions. He learned the history. And he decided on his own to do something about it, not for publicity, not for approval, but because it felt right. That's not the behavior of someone being groomed by palace handlers to follow protocol. That's the behavior of someone who's thinking for himself. And if that's the kind of instinct he's developing at 13, imagine what kind of king he might be at 40. This story suggests that the next reign won't be about managing Diana's memory through official portraits or renamed buildings. It'll be about small, specific, deeply human gestures that honor her in ways the institution never could. And it suggests that maybe, just maybe, the royal family's relationship with Diana's legacy was never really resolved by 3 decades of silence. It was only paused, waiting for someone young enough not to know he wasn't supposed to remember. Here's what we're left with: a 13-year-old boy who asked a question about a photograph, a father who answered honestly and made something beautiful possible, and a grandfather who, 45 years after marrying the woman he loved and lost, finally found a way to stand beside her memory without saying a word. No press release, no official statement, no grand gesture, just 3 people, a generation apart, quietly choosing to remember a day the palace wanted forgotten. Diana chose myrtle at 20 for a wedding she probably never thought about again. George chose the same flower at 13 for a garden built to remember her instead. And somewhere in between, a king stood alone in the morning light, looking down at the soil where his grandson had knelt the night before. That's not protocol. That's not duty. That's family. If this story moved you the way it moved me, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because we're committed to telling the royal stories that matter, not just the ones the palace wants you to hear. Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you think George will continue honoring Diana's memory in ways like this as he gets older? And what do you think Charles was thinking when he stood at that statue alone? And don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen to discover another untold story about Princess Diana that the royal family tried to bury for decades. You won't believe what we uncovered.